Look at any photograph of a Tier 1 Special Operations unit gearing up for a direct action mission. Night vision mounted on ballistic helmets, suppressed rifles with IR lasers, plate carriers loaded with 30 pounds of armor and ammunition, thousands of dollars of equipment engineered to keep a man alive in the worst conditions on Earth. And then look at his feet. He's wearing Vans, or Converse, or some trail runner that looks like it belongs on a Sunday morning jog, not a midnight raid on a hostile compound. It looks wrong. It looks like a mistake. A guy wearing $50,000 of military hardware and a $40 pair of skate shoes. At first glance, it doesn't make any sense. Why would the most elite military units in the world, with access to virtually unlimited equipment budgets and custom-built everything, choose to wear footwear designed for kickflips? The answer is surprisingly deep, and it starts in a place most people wouldn't expect: the rivers of Vietnam. When the Navy SEALs were officially commissioned in 1962, they inherited their DNA from the underwater demolition teams of World War II. Those frogmen had operated in swim trunks, fins, and little else. But Vietnam was a different kind of war. SEALs weren't just swimming to beaches. They were conducting ambushes along the Mekong Delta, moving through mangrove swamps, and operating in riverine environments where the line between water and land barely existed. One moment you're waist-deep in a canal. The next, you're sprinting across a mud flat toward a tree line. Standard-issue jungle boots were a disaster for this kind of work. They were heavy. They waterlogged in seconds and took hours to dry. In the tropical heat, boots that never dried bred trench foot within days, and critically, they were too bulky to fit inside dive fins. An operator wearing jungle boots who needed to enter the water had to stop, remove the boots, strap on fins, swim, then reverse the entire process on the far bank. In a combat zone, that transition was a vulnerability window nobody could afford. So the SEALs started wearing Converse Chuck Taylors, canvas, flat-soled, lightweight. A Chuck Taylor weighed almost nothing compared to a jungle boot. The canvas dried in the sun within minutes, and the slim, low-profile design slid directly into standard-issue dive fins without modification. An operator could swim a river with his fins on over his chucks, hit the far bank, kick off the fins, and immediately start moving on foot. SEALs just started buying Chuck Taylors at civilian stores and wearing them on operations. It was one of the first examples of what would become a defining feature of special operations culture: operators solving problems with whatever actually works, regardless of whether it's in the supply catalog. But Vietnam was only the beginning. The real reason sneakers embedded themselves permanently into special operations has to do with a room most civilians will never see. Every special operations unit in the world maintains a close-quarters battle training facility, a building specifically designed for room-clearing drills. Operators spend thousands of hours inside these structures throughout their careers, rehearsing entries, running target discrimination scenarios, and refining the precise footwork that keeps them alive when they stack on a door and breach into a room full of unknowns. This is where sneakers earn their reputation. Because CQB isn't about brute force, it's about footwork. When an operator slices the pie around a door frame, his feet are making dozens of micro-adjustments per second. Weight shifts from heel to ball. The lead foot pivots on the toe. The trail foot repositions to maintain balance while the upper body stays level and the muzzle stays on target. Transitioning from standing to kneeling to prone and back happens in fractions of a second. Every one of those transitions runs through the ankle. A traditional combat boot restricts ankle flexion. The high collar that protects against sprains during long ruck marches actively fights the operator during CQB. It resists the lateral movement. It slows the pivot. It creates a split-second delay in foot placement that, compounded across thousands of entries, translates into slower clears and less precise positioning. Sneakers eliminate that restriction entirely. A flat-soled skate shoe gives the operator full range of ankle motion. It allows the foot to articulate naturally the way it would barefoot. And it does something else that matters more than most people realize. It lets the operator feel the floor. This is called proprioception, the body's ability to sense its own position in space through tactile feedback from the environment. Your feet are covered in cutaneous mechanoreceptors, pressure-sensitive nerve endings that feed information directly to the nervous system about what you're standing on, how your weight is distributed, and whether the surface beneath you is stable. A thick-soled combat boot filters that information. It puts 1.5 inches of rubber, foam, and shank material between those nerve endings and the ground. In a training environment, that's manageable. On a mountain, it's fine. But in a pitch-black building at 2 in the morning, when you can't look down because your eyes and your weapon need to be pointed at the same thing, losing that tactile connection to the floor is a problem. A thin-soled sneaker preserves it. The operator can feel the difference between concrete and plywood. He can feel a step down before his weight commits to it. He can feel the edge of a staircase through the sole. He can feel wet tile versus dry tile. That feedback loop runs faster than conscious thought. The body corrects balance and foot placement automatically without the operator diverting a single % of his attention from the threat in front of him. Special operations doctrine doesn't call it proprioception. Operators just say the sneakers have better ground feel. But the effect is the same. Then there's the noise. A hard-soled combat boot on a concrete stairwell sounds like a hammer strike. The thick Vibram lugs that provide excellent grip on mountain trails create heavy, distinct footfalls on smooth indoor surfaces. In a stealth approach, clearing a building, moving through a corridor, creeping up a metal ship ladder, that sound signature announces your position to anyone listening. Sneakers are dramatically quieter. The soft, flexible rubber compounds absorb impact rather than transmitting it. A man in Vans moving across a tile floor is nearly silent. Not perfectly silent, but close enough that the difference between a boot step and a sneaker step could be the difference between surprise and a gunfight in a hallway. And that connects directly to another domain where sneakers became essential: maritime operations. Visit, board, search, and seizure, VBSS, is one of the core mission sets for naval special warfare. It involves boarding ships at sea, often from helicopters or small craft, and clearing them deck by deck. The surfaces an operator encounters during a ship takedown are unlike anything on land. Wet steel decks, metal ladder rungs slick with condensation, narrow passageways with painted metal floors, rubber-coated catwalks. Here is where the engineering of a skate shoe becomes accidentally brilliant. When Paul Van Doren founded Vans in 1966, he designed the waffle sole specifically to grip the smooth surfaces of empty swimming pools and skateboard ramps. The soft, vulcanized rubber compound was formulated to stick to polished concrete and lacquered wood. The waffle pattern created suction-like traction on flat, slick surfaces without requiring aggressive lugs. A wet ship deck is, functionally, a large, slick surface. The same properties that keep a skateboarder's feet planted on a half-pipe keep an operator's feet planted on a rain-soaked flight deck. Nobody at Vans designed the waffle sole for maritime assault, but the physics didn't care about the intention. The sole worked, and operators noticed. Vans eventually noticed that operators noticed. Through a collaborative group called DEFCON, Vans released limited editions built specifically for naval special warfare, featuring AOR-1 and AOR-2 camouflage patterns, waterproof suede, flame-retardant materials, and the same sticky waffle sole that made them famous on a skateboard. The epicenter of naval special warfare on the West Coast is Coronado, California. Bud/S training happens on the beaches of Coronado, The SEAL teams are based in Coronado, and Coronado sits in the heart of Southern California surf and skate culture. For decades, the men who passed Bud/S and entered the teams grew up surfing, skating, and wearing Vans and Converse long before they ever wore a uniform. That cultural DNA didn't disappear when they joined. It followed them in. Mixed among the plate carriers and night vision in a team room, you'd find surfboards leaned against the wall and skate shoes drying on a windowsill. The same generation that grew up watching Tony Hawk and Kelly Slater was now filling the ranks of the most elite military units in the world. And they brought their footwear preferences with them, not as a fashion statement, but because those shoes genuinely worked for the things they needed to do. By the mid-2000s, the line between operator culture and civilian gear had blurred enough to produce something new: the concept of the gray man. In low-visibility operations, surveillance, intelligence gathering, moving through civilian populations in denied areas, the last thing an operator wants is to look military. Tactical pants, combat boots, and a MOLLE-covered backpack scream government to anyone paying attention. A pair of Merrell trail runners, Salomon hiking shoes, or plain Vans paired with jeans and a polo shirt tells a different story. The operator looks like a tourist, a contractor, an aid worker, anything but military. The shoes still provide the grip, flexibility, and ground feel he needs if the situation turns violent. But they blend into the civilian environment seamlessly. The gray man doesn't disappear by being invisible. He disappears by being unremarkable. And footwear is one of the first things trained observers check when screening a crowd. On the night of May 2nd, 2011, when DevGru operators hit the compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, none of them wore standard military boots. At least one operator was confirmed wearing the Vask Juxt, a low-profile civilian multi-sport shoe with a sticky rubber sole designed for scrambling on rock. It weighed half of what a combat boot weighs. It provided excellent traction on the compound's concrete walls and interior floors. It allowed the explosive footwork CQB demands, and it looked like something any civilian hiker might pull off a shelf at REI. The most consequential special operations raid of the 21st century was conducted in part in hiking shoes. The tactical footwear industry eventually caught up. Altama, a military boot manufacturer with decades of government contracts, went directly to SEALs in Virginia Beach and Coronado and asked a simple question: what would the perfect maritime shoe look like? The answer was essentially a combat-grade Chuck Taylor. That became the Altama Maritime Assault Boot, known unofficially as the Combat Chuck. It kept the flat, fin-compatible profile of a Converse. It kept the thin sole for ground feel. But it added rust-proof hardware, 1000 denier Cordura nylon that dries faster than canvas, dual non-metallic drainage ports that expel water with every step, an ABS shank for stability on caving ladders, and a sticky rubber outsole borrowed from rock climbing technology that grips wet steel like the surface is dry. It was the first piece of military equipment that openly acknowledged operators had been right about sneakers for 40 years. Nike followed with the SFB, the Special Field Boot. Developed by Toby Hatfield in Nike's Innovation Kitchen, the SFB merged the flex and cushioning of a Nike-free running shoe with military-grade construction. Salomon introduced the Forces line. Merrell built the Moab Tactical Series. An entire industry emerged from the simple observation that the most dangerous men in the world preferred shoes designed for skate parks over shoes designed for battlefields. There's exactly one scenario where sneakers fail catastrophically, and every operator knows it: fast roping. When a helicopter hovers 40 feet above a rooftop and operators slide down a thick braided rope, The friction between the rope and whatever is on the operator's feet generates extreme concentrated heat in seconds. The thick leather and heat-resistant rubber of a traditional combat boot can absorb that friction without structural failure. A sneaker cannot. The EVA foams and soft synthetic rubbers used in athletic shoes can soften, deform, or melt under fast rope friction. An operator who fast ropes in sneakers risks losing grip, suffering severe burns, or dropping the last 20 feet onto a hard surface with no control. This is why boots never disappeared entirely. They remain the default for airborne insertions, mountain operations, heavy rucking, and any mission where the terrain is harsh enough to demand ankle support and puncture protection. Nobody is walking a week-long patrol through the Hindu Kush in a pair of Vans, not because Vans aren't respected in the community, because the mission dictates the footwear, not the culture. And that's the actual point. The story of sneakers and special operations isn't really a story about shoes. It's a story about a culture that treats equipment as a problem to be solved rather than a rule to be followed. When the standard issue boot failed the mission, operators didn't file a complaint through the supply chain. They drove to a Converse store and bought the solution off a civilian shelf. When the solution proved itself over decades of combat, the industry reverse-engineered it into purpose-built tactical gear. Look at the photograph one more time. The operator with the night vision and the suppressed rifle and the plate carrier and the $40 sneakers. It still looks wrong. It still looks like a mistake. But it's not a mistake. It's the product of 60 years of men choosing what works over what's expected. It's a Vietnam-era frogman pulling Chuck Taylors out of a rucksack because they fit in his dive fins. It's a DevGru operator in a shoot house at midnight wearing Vans because they let him feel the concrete through the sole. It's a man in Abbottabad wearing hiking shoes because the mission needed speed, not ankle support. The most iconic piece of Special Forces equipment isn't a rifle, it isn't a suppressor, it isn't a set of night vision goggles. Sometimes, it's just a pair of sneakers that nobody in the supply chain ever authorized, worn by a man who figured out that the best gear is whatever keeps you alive, regardless of what it looks like. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. Because there's a lot more of this hidden logic still worth pulling apart.